Chairman. Glad to be invited here to provide my input and my experience to your committee. I want to make a few points from my testimony that I think are particularly important. First one is that the safe and wise beneficial use of coal combustion products is truly good for our environment. We create more durable and longer lasting infrastructure. As a result, we don't need to repair and replace things nearly as often. We really gain some significant benefits as a result. It's just some calculations we've done in terms of energy usage, savings on the order of 1.7 million households of energy usage each year. 31% of the water use in California equivalent greenhouse gas reduction of nearly 2 million cars. These are really substantial beneficial impact or beneficial attributes that we get from using these materials in sustainable construction. And I would argue that given the pressing energy and climate issues that we're talking about today, that we ought to walk carefully when we make decisions about how we might affect that. The second point I'd like to make is that we have been looking at this issue for nearly 2 decades of whether these materials are hazardous. And the materials that we're looking at today really are not different than the ones we've considered in the past to be non-hazardous. There really hasn't been a substantial change in those materials. There's really not a scientific reason to designate these materials as hazardous. Third point, and one of the issues of concern is that the release of trace elements and other constituents from coal combustion products used in reuse applications, things like arsenic and cadmium were mentioned earlier. One of the things that we need to realize is that all materials that we use in the environment release these things. And really what it gets down to is really safe and wise use of materials and engineering things properly so that we can manage those releases to the environment in a way that protects the public. We know when we use CCBs in concrete-like application that those releases are essentially negligible, that that's a very safe and wise use. Our history has shown that over time and time again. Fourth point, and I think this is a particularly important one, is that 20 years I've been working in this industry interacting with people who use industrial byproducts in construction projects, people who actually put it into their infrastructure, who buy these products and assume responsibility for it being in their infrastructure. People like state highway departments, counties, public works directors, the people who buy that. And one of the key issues that we deal with in promoting the beneficial use of industrial byproducts is overcoming issues of perceived risk. People are concerned about the risk of using that product. And I would argue that the designation of these materials as a hazardous waste, even with an exemption for beneficial use, will have a very significant impact on that perceived risk and will result in a significant reduction in the use of these materials in construction. I would argue as well that it's not only these materials that will be affected by that, but all the industrial byproducts that we use will be affected adversely. One argument could be made if it's coal combustion products this year, what will it be next year? What is the use that I'm going to be concerned about? That perceived risk is very real. The stigma associated with the hazardous waste designation is very real. And I consider that a major issue that we need to consider. I would argue as well that we actually know how to manage these materials in a very safe and wise way, both in the beneficial use application and in the disposal application. In my home state of Wisconsin, we've been doing this for 20 years. We don't have environmental problems with our disposal facilities or with our reuse applications. Rules like we have in Wisconsin can be applied nationwide. They can be regulated either at the state or federal level, and they can be very effective. And I would argue that that type of example could be used to create some type of national rule or policy. So I'll leave it at that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Benson, for your testimony.